The air in Santa Barbara had always held a certain magic, a mix of salt, surf, and whispered promises of power, but no one expected it to crack open the fragile illusion surrounding one of the most famous couples in the world. Prince Harry, once celebrated as the golden son of the monarchy, now stood on the edge of a precipice he hadn't seen coming, and at the center of it all was none other than Kevin Costner, Hollywood's old-school titan, casually, almost carelessly, dropping a bomb that would ripple across continents. The cameras caught Harry smiling, a polished grin that betrayed nothing, but behind the eyes, the storm had already begun. He had seen whispers before, rumors floating like dead leaves through tabloid pages and late-night gossip corners, but when Kevin spoke, it was different. It carried weight, authority, and a sting that cut deeper than any headline ever could. This wasn't the press. This wasn't a late-night scuttlebutt online. This was the man who built empires in film, whose presence alone demanded attention, saying in essence that Meghan, the woman Harry had built his post-royal life around, was no longer untouchable, no longer above scrutiny, and in a world that weighed reputation as currency, that meant trouble. It began, innocuously enough, a quiet discussion about future charitable endeavors, a benefit that had, over the years, quietly become the meeting ground for Hollywood's elite, where producers, investors, and artists moved not just with smiles, but with calculation, influence, and the invisible strings of alliances. But the atmosphere shifted when Kevin, known for his independence, his refusal to bow to industry pressure, made a single, almost casual remark: Meghan would not be invited to his private gatherings connected to the event anymore. A polite nod, a slight pause, yet the weight of it rolled across the room like a silent wave. Conversation slowed. Eyes darted, glanced, measured. In Hollywood, where politeness often masks wariness, this was a seismic signal. Harry, on stage, applauding others, looked composed, but inside, a knot had formed. This wasn't just exclusion. This was a subtle indictment from one of the few voices whose opinion carried beyond gossip. It was an echo that Hollywood might no longer be a friendly ground for the Sussex brand, and the tremor didn't stop in Los Angeles. Whispers began circulating in quiet boardrooms and dimly lit lounges where deals were made and reputations evaluated. Kevin's statement, stripped of context but heavy in implication, was already becoming a narrative. Meghan, once the unstoppable force of celebrity royalty turned Hollywood aspirant, was now a topic of discussion that veered into caution, a potential liability rather than the golden asset she had seemed to embody. For Harry, the double-edged sword of love and loyalty now felt unbearably sharp. Each handshake he returned, each smile flashed to cameras, hid a growing tension, a quiet heartbreak that few could read but that burned all the same. And when Kevin's comments began to reach the ears of executives connected to their Netflix deals, to agencies managing Meghan's career, Harry's protective instincts collided violently with his reality. The empire they had started in Montecito, built on a mixture of royal prestige and media savvy, was showing cracks in its foundation. Hollywood, meanwhile, continued its quiet recalibration. Agents whispered, producers hesitated, contracts were re-examined, and morality clauses, those invisible guardians of reputation, gained newfound prominence. Meghan's name, once a golden seal on a project, was now scrutinized in meetings, on phone calls, and across encrypted messages. Kevin's words were not a headline but a specter, one that hovered over each boardroom, each negotiation, each decision about collaboration or partnership. And Harry, watching, heartbroken, could do nothing but observe the slow drip of isolation, the subtle shift of opportunities that had once flowed freely toward them, now diverted or withheld. A silent cautionary tale written in the margins of Hollywood contracts. Inside Buckingham Palace, strategy sessions quietly intensified. Legal advisors revisited long-dormant acts, constitutional scholars debated improbable scenarios, senior aides considered how far the ripple could reach. The Titles Deprivation Act of 1917, a law conceived in the crucible of war, once a tool against allegiances deemed dangerous, now became a ghostly reference point for a modern scandal with royal echoes. Could a private comment in California by a Hollywood legend create a chain reaction powerful enough to invoke centuries-old laws? The discussion itself revealed the gravity. The monarchy had learned from Andrew, from Epstein, from decades of managing image and crisis. And now Harry, standing at the intersection of two worlds, was witnessing the collision firsthand. One misstep, one rumor, and the life they had painstakingly constructed in America could spiral into scrutiny reminiscent of historical crises. Every glance, every interaction, Every carefully orchestrated event became loaded with meaning. Harry's public appearances, once shared with Meghan as a united front, were increasingly solo, moments of reclaiming agency, but also signs of strain. Every photo taken in Montecito, every handshake with an athlete, every speech in Angola or Canada carried a dual narrative, one of public service and one of private tension. Each step a delicate dance between duty and heartbreak. Observers noted subtle signs, the weight in his posture, the moments of lingering thought, the quiet resilience mixed with unmistakable sorrow. Harry's world was no longer binary, it was a labyrinth of loyalties, expectations, and consequences, all accelerated by a single remark from Kevin Costner, the ripple of which seemed poised to travel further than anyone could predict. The silence that followed was not loud, not explosive, not the kind that makes headlines instantly, but the kind that creeps in slowly, wraps itself around decisions, and changes outcomes before anyone even realizes what has shifted. And for Prince Harry, that silence was becoming unbearable, because it wasn't just coming from the outside anymore, it was beginning to echo within the very life he had chosen, within the partnership he had defended so fiercely against critics, family, and an entire institution. The whispers were no longer just distant rumors floating through media cycles, they were now entering rooms he walked into, conversations that paused when he approached, deals that seemed to stall without explanation, and invitations that quietly stopped arriving. And somewhere in that growing distance, Kevin Costner's remark lingered like a shadow that refused to fade, a reminder that something had changed, something irreversible, something that no carefully crafted public appearance could undo. What made it even more unsettling was how invisible the shift appeared to the outside world. On the surface, everything still looked polished, controlled, perfectly curated. Appearances were maintained, statements were measured, smiles were practiced, but behind that fed, a different reality was unfolding, one that only those closest to the situation could sense. Harry, once so certain, now found himself questioning not just the people around him, but the path that had led him here. The decisions that had seemed so bold, so necessary, now feeling heavier, more complicated, almost suffocating under the weight of consequences that were only now revealing themselves. And Meghan, at the center of it all, remained both the person he had chosen and the storm he could no longer ignore, a paradox that made every step forward feel like a step deeper into uncertainty. And then came the moments that couldn't be ignored, the small but telling signs that something deeper was unfolding behind closed doors. Harry's increasing solo appearances were no longer just coincidences or scheduling quirks, they were becoming patterns, visible indicators of a shift that insiders could no longer dismiss. Each time he stepped out alone, whether at events tied to his long-standing causes or during international visits that echoed his past royal duties, the narrative grew stronger, a prince reconnecting with his roots while something else quietly fractured in the background. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't confrontational, but it was undeniable, a slow unraveling that played out in subtle gestures rather than explosive scenes. And those who had watched Harry for years, who understood the balance he once carried so effortlessly, could now see the strain, the internal conflict that no public statement could fully conceal. Back in Britain, the conversations that had once been hypothetical were now taking on a sharper edge. Advisors, already on high alert, began to treat the situation not as a passing storm, but as a potential crisis that required preparation, strategy, and above all, control. The monarchy had survived centuries by adapting, by managing perception, by knowing when to act and when to wait, but this situation was different because it existed outside their immediate reach, unfolding in a world where they had limited influence, where narratives could spiral without warning. And yet, the possibility of it circling back, of it touching the institution in ways that could not be contained, was enough to keep those discussions alive, enough to ensure that every development, no matter how small, was being monitored, evaluated, and prepared for. And at the center of all of this was Harry, standing between two worlds that were no longer aligning but pulling in opposite directions. On one side was the life he had built, the independence he had fought for, the love he had chosen above everything else. On the other was the legacy he had been born into, the expectations, the responsibilities, the unspoken understanding that some things were bigger than any individual choice. And now, with the pressure mounting from both sides, the question that had once seemed unthinkable was beginning to take shape, not as a dramatic declaration, but as a quiet, persistent thought that refused to go away. What happens when the life you chose begins to conflict with the identity you can never fully escape? Those closest to the situation described a man caught in a storm of his own making, not because he had done anything wrong, but because the world around him had shifted in ways he could not control. The heartbreak was not loud, not visible in a single moment, but present in the accumulation of everything that had changed, everything that had been been lost, everything that now felt uncertain. It was in the pauses between words, the weight behind his eyes, the careful way he navigated each public moment as if balancing on a line that could tip at any second. And while the world speculated, debated, and consumed every new rumor with relentless curiosity, Harry was left to face the reality behind the narrative. A reality that was far more complex, far more personal, and far more painful than any headline could ever capture. Meanwhile, the ripple effect of Kevin Costner's unexpected intervention continued to expand, touching corners of both Hollywood and royal circles in ways that few had anticipated. What had begun as a single remark had now evolved into a catalyst, a trigger that exposed underlying tensions, forced reevaluations, and brought hidden dynamics into the light. It wasn't about one comment anymore, it was about everything that comment represented. The shifting alliances, the changing perceptions, the fragile nature of reputation in a world where one moment can redefine everything. And as those ripples spread, they carried with them a question that no one could fully answer. A question that lingered in every conversation, every decision, every carefully considered move. Was this the beginning of a turning point? Or just the first glimpse of something even bigger? Something that had yet to fully reveal itself? Because in the end, what made this moment so powerful was not just the controversy, not just the speculation, but the uncertainty, the sense that the story was still unfolding, that the final chapter had not yet been written. Harry's heartbreak, whether visible or hidden, whether acknowledged or denied, had become a symbol of that uncertainty, a reflection of a life caught between past and future, loyalty and identity, love and consequence. And as the world watched, waiting for the next development, the next reveal, the next shift in a narrative that had already taken so many unexpected turns, one thing remained clear. Whatever came next would not just define the Sussex story, it would reshape it in ways that no one, not even Harry himself, could fully predict.